Good evening, my little darklings. Thank you for tuning into the best in paranormal talk radio. This is Darkness Radio Live from my living room with a huge Darkness Radio logo behind me. And I'm glad that you guys are here. If this is your first time tuning into our live show, welcome. For those of you that are here all the time, thank you for coming back and spending some time with us. We've got a great show lined up for you tonight. Before we get started, though, I've got some cool news to break. Tonight, we are going to do our show, Darkness Radio presents Witchcraft, Magic, and the Art of Necromancy. Dan and Kat Eckhart are guests. They'll be joining us in just a few moments. But I've got some big news. Obviously, the anniversary of the deaths at the Lizzie Borden house just passed this week. And with that, we have some big news to announce. Next month on Discovery Plus, The Curse of Lizzie Borden. Sam Beltrusis, me, Dave Schrader, Luann Jolly, and psychic medium Chris Fleming. We enter the Lizzie Borden house with some never-before-heard EVP and communication. I have one of the most profound and bizarre experiences ever of my paranormal investigating life. I hope you guys will tune in and check that out, spend a little time with us. It's going to be a great episode. It'll be in September. And we will be letting you know as we get a little bit closer, as you always know. I also want to make a quick mention that today, for those of you watching live, it is Tim's mom's birthday. So happy birthday to Jackie Johnson. And tomorrow will be, for those of you listening to the podcast on Friday, celebrating in memory of my mother's, what would be her 75th birthday. Mom passed away almost 5 years ago in November this year. And we're remembering her 75th birthday. That is tomorrow. So God bless, Mom. Thanks a lot for everything. We've got a great show lined up for you. We had them on, I think, just a few months back and had such a great time and a great conversation. I asked them to come back and do a live with us so that way we could actually entertain your questions, thoughts, concerns, and go a little bit deeper into what they do. So, ladies and gentlemen, Darkness Radio is proud to present Witchcraft, Magic, and the Art of Necromancy with Dan and Kat Eckhart, two of the best-dressed paranormalists in the field. Welcome, guys. Thanks for being here.
Well, thanks for having us, Dave.
Good to have you both back. I felt grossly underdressed for this, so I went with not just my black regular shirt. I threw a little flash and dazzle, some color in there.
I see that. Very nice.
Well, you know, I got to try to keep. I don't have a cool ascot. I used to have a cool ascot. I don't anymore. I think it got stolen at one of the events, jerks. Maybe it's you, Dan Eckhart. Let me see that thing closely.
I certainly hope not.
Those are awesome. Guys, I am so glad to have you back here so that we can kind of do a reintroduction for our audience. Tell us a little bit about the Eckharts and about your school and what you guys do, if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah. Those are some, we're the Eckharts. My name is Dan, and of course, this is Kat.
Hi.
And I am I'm a paranormal enthusiast, we'll put it that way. I grew up in a haunted house, have always been interested in the paranormal, the occult, the esoteric. And then also I fell into doing seances. And Kat?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah, we do seances together, and we're way into the occult. As you said, we have a school of the occult arts where we teach all kinds of subjects that really interest us and the students. But we're also mediums, importantly. And also, I am an eclectic witch. So we're kind of embedded.
Exactly.
Entrenched, it sounds like. You guys have deeply embraced the aspect of the paranormal. But Dan, you mentioned that you kind of fell into seances. How does one fall into a seance? I've been drunk at a table and fallen asleep on the table, but how does one just, boom, fall into seances?
Yeah, so it wasn't something I ever imagined for myself. It wasn't something that I thought growing up, oh, one day you too, Dan, will be a medium and working with the seance and we're investigating paranormal spaces. But ultimately, throughout having these experiences in a kind of haunted environment and haunted house, even though at the time they were terrifying and they were something that it was taking me a lot to frame and work through as a person, like, what is this? Am I crazy? Am I just like possessed? Is this demons? What is this? I was enthralled with this book of, and I'm sure plenty of people have these, the Reader's Digest Mysteries of the 20th Century. And they had like one on cars and one on like pharmaceutical and like one on.
Wait, all right, you got to stop for a second.
Yeah.
So you dress impeccably. You wear an ascot. You've got miraculous hair. Your wife looks like she stepped out of the 1930s movies. and you read Reader's Digest. Are you vampires that are really closer to about 140 years old? I don't get this.
Sometimes it feels that way. Sometimes it feels like being a little out of time. But there was one book that was just dedicated to like the mysteries of the paranormal. Yes. And there were like kind of snide stories in there about like spontaneous combustion. And I think they even mentioned Lizzie Borden, and they talked about UFOs and all of that. But there was one section about seances and mediumship and magic, like real, like Aleister Crowley, the wickedest man alive, magic. And this just captivated me because the promise of that was a way to control these kinds of situations, a way to exert some kind of authority over these terrifying experiences, and also frame them with, figures throughout history who've bumped up against the paranormal and had it change them. So for me, even though I was never a spiritualist or involved in the spiritualist tradition, the occult and ritual work evolved into a way to contact the beyond and work with the beyond, and provide a little bit of personal space for myself within these encounters.
Well, then let me ask you too. Obviously, you teach some of this. You go through it. You talk about Aleister Crowley and the magic. What exactly is magic, as we have it running in our title? Witchcraft, magic, and the art of necromancy. That necromancy, speaking with the dead, communicating or communing with the dead. But magic, is it? The book The Secret came out back in, I want to say, the 1990s or early 2000s. It's all bled together for me at this point. And that seemed to be a form of magic. It was invoking power, the power of intent we talk about a lot on this show. We did a big intention experiment last week, and we've done so in the past. Is magic just a mystical, fabulistic title to something that's really more about intention and the power of setting goals and setting yourself right in the universe?
It's a slippery concept. It's one that's hard to pin down, but I think you're doing a good job. You sound like one of those teachers that are like, well, you're not coloring in the lines, Mr. Schrader, but we appreciate the effort. No, it's something I struggle with on a daily basis because, Kat, as a witch, how do you look at magic?
I see it as many different disciplines. What you're talking about, Dave, is kind of new thought traditions where you set an intention and you kind of impress that upon, and different people have different sort of theories on what this is, but universal consciousness or a formless substance that exerts your will in the world. And magic really is about will and reclaiming your power to exert in the world, to exert your desire, to manifest your intentions and goals, and to really reach your highest self, which is what really attracted us to magic.
Exactly. Magic doesn't have to be dealing with deities or arcane scripts or the Golden Dawn or these magical institutions. It can be. There are two really prevailing schools of thought. One is that we're plugging into this hidden power, this occult power, these pantheons of gods or angels or what have you.
Archetypes.
Archetypes that are helping us manifest our wills. And then the other school of thought is that magic is simply a psychodrama, that it's a way for us to kind of take a little bit of the heavy lifting off of our conscious and work directly with the subconscious to, again, achieve that goal of exerting one's will on the universe. And I think it almost doesn't matter which one it is. I'm of the opinion, and because I come from this school of esoterica that could be closely aligned with, let's say, chaos magic, which is about taking from different traditions or different concepts and just plugging in what works. Mm-hmm. I'm of the opinion that if I need to believe in one thing one day to accurately do what I want to do, or if it's just all in my head, either way, it's okay.
Well, right. I mean, but that's where the magic lies, right? Mm-hmm. Listen, we've done prayer and healing requests on the show for 15 years. We've seen remarkable results. Remarkable results. Is that magic? Is it God? But if we're talking to the ear of God and he heals somebody, that is magic, right? I mean, it's not, hey, Rocky, watch me pull a rabbit out of my head. Mm-hmm. That kind of magic, but it is magic, right?
It is.
And they used to call that, it's now science, what used to be magic, right? The meshing of herbs and spices and things to bring back health and help people out and do this. our abilities to tap into these different aspects, it seems to be butting into this newer concept as well, that we're living in a matrix universe. Obviously, it's much more popular since the Matrix movies, and I'm sure we're going to hear a new explosion with Matrix 4 coming out. But is there something to that? Is this world around us amorphous? Does it change constantly on what we do and how we alter and put things into it?
I think it does. I think it responds to the frames that we provide. The things we expect to work will work. And I think that there's not such clear distinction between spirituality and religion and belief in magical practice. There's this concept that magic is all about like people in hooded robes or witches around a fire casting spells. But you brought up New Thought, which is a distinctly American invention. That comes directly out of the turn of the century in America, this idea of, well, if we just think positive thoughts, things will change. And then we can plug that into a materialist science lens and say, well, you know, if an individual, and there have been many materialist science experiments run on this, that if someone who's, for example, in a hospital, has a group of people praying for them or thinking positive thoughts about them or sending them good vibes, statistically, they're actually likely to get better faster and to see improved rates of healing. But it doesn't seem to necessarily matter what is being invoked in those good vibes, whether it's prayer or a spell or just good wishes.
I think what matters there is the belief and the belief in that it's working and belief that you're actually doing something. And what you were asking Dave earlier, I think it also matters whose perspective it is, whether we're looking as individuals or as a collective, and depending on what you believe, you know, what makes up reality? Is it consciousness or is it sort of something more connected, bigger than that? And I think magic often sort of speaks to that belief of universal consciousness and of a oneness that connects us all.
So magic is more of magic is all kind of a catch-all phrase, really, isn't it?
I think it can be, yeah. And I don't think it's ever had a very clear definition. The one you hear the most is Crowley. Crowley saying, you know, magic is the impression of the will or the achievement of one's will, so long as it harms none. That's a really big blanket umbrella. And whether you're a Gardnerian witch or a traditional witch, or today we're seeing again a lot of people who are kind of plugging into magic in the zeitgeist as an aesthetic or as something that resonates with them in that psychodrama kind of way, that theater of the mind kind of way. The results hopefully will be the same. With
the term witchcraft, obviously, you know, we've been reporting over the years, you know, over the last 15, 16 years, there's been a lot of turning away from normal church and more people feeling the pull to things like witchcraft. Now, obviously, it's got a stigma to it, right? Because of what we had happen in Salem and in different parts of the world back 200-300 years ago. People are still holding on to that aspect of witch. It doesn't help with Wizard of Oz and some of the other things. Now you've got shows like Charmed and programs that have Bewitched that have kind of humanized the spirit of what a witch is and what they can do. But with the concept of witchcraft, Kat, how would you explain what witchcraft really is, so that many of the people that are here is thinking, oh, that's evil, you're evoking dark side, you're evoking this, you're evoking that. What is the truth of what witchcraft is?
Well, witchcraft kind of looks back at something that you brought up earlier, a folk magic tradition, or these kind of ancient nature-based or pagan religions. And it brings that into kind of a modern day sensibility. Now, witchcraft can mean a lot of different things to different people, but generally it is the combination of that kind of ancient occult knowledge and an application of sort of reclaiming power today. Witchcraft isn't all dark and scary and having that kind of aesthetic.
But I like how you said it isn't all dark and scary. So is there an aspect of the work that is dark and scary?
It doesn't.
Or is it like any religion? There's there's good and bad. There's people that practice and call upon dark and do more with dark? Or is true witchcraft knowing the balance between the two and uniting them to create magic?
I think so. I do think that there is more darkness in witchcraft just because there is kind of an acceptance of concepts like death, of confronting things like shadow work, which is basically just working on the parts of yourself that you want to improve. And also things like exploring the paranormal, which includes a lot of sitting in the darkness and seeing what speaks out to you. There is an adventurousness to witchcraft that I don't always see in other spiritualities.
I think as a subculture or a marginalized version of spirituality, which witchcraft has been for many years, it has a tendency to kind of flirt with some of the more aesthetically dark or edgy kind of things because it attracts people who I think are comfortable on the periphery. You're not going to find people who associate themselves with the occult who may be in, although there certainly are people who are very plugged into their local communities, they're not very vocal about it because of those distinctions, because of those past inferences, because of the satanic panic and things like that. So a lot of people who are more visible in society will keep those things quiet. And that is a dictum of magic and practicing witchcraft and the occult. People who are more loud about it may already be kind of on the margins. And so there is a willingness to share the darker things, to get a rise out of someone. And in that, I would look to someone like Anton LaVey, who someone in the chat mentioned something about the devil. Anton LaVey was the founder of the Church of Satan. And he basically viewed his entire purpose on life and in life to be essentially like an internet troll. He was just trying to get a rise out of people. He specifically says that he's the cosmic whoopee cushion. So you kind of get an idea of the people who are out and facing publicly this idea.
Well, LaVey was a lot with the concept of an anarchist, right? The concept of shattering paradigms, believing
Yes.
that there is a God when we, in fact, the Bible tells us we have the same powers Christ had and that some of the other prophets had. We just have to learn to accept them and utilize them, and that we are a power force within ourselves. We don't necessarily have to go to one dynamic or the other. He used Satanism because it wasn't devil worship. There was difference. He was using that as it could have been bozoism. It could have been Donny Osmondism, right? He was just putting a face to the fact that you can, it doesn't matter where I pray to or where this comes from. What really it's about is about me and the magic that comes forth and the things that I can call upon. Music, as we've talked about on the show, it seems to be a form of witchcraft in the lightest sense, because it is cathartic, it's healing, it's repetitive, incantation like, right? There's a rhythm and a meter to it to call upon emotions, feelings, pride, anger, hatred, resentment, jealousy, love, happiness, joy. So it seems like that in itself is also another form of magic and witchcraft. I can time travel when I listen to music. And I mean that in the purest sense. I mean, I can literally hear a song on the radio and I can smell the kitchen, my mom's kitchen. I can smell the cigars at my buddy's poker table as we're drinking Jolt Cola and smoking cigars, playing poker till 3 a.m. It has that transformative ability to it.
It does. And there's some actual materialist science on this, some research that's been done that shows individuals who surround themselves with artifacts from when they were younger, music they listened to growing up, that Jolt Cola, if you have any cases of that, or hang art from their childhood on their walls or surround themselves with it, they seem to actually age more slowly in clinical trials. There's been some emerging research about surrounding people in elderly care homes with things from their childhood and reporting measurable benefits from things like flexibility or cognitive recall. So there is an element of magic there. And to go further, Alan Moore, who's a comic book artist and also practicing, he would call himself a wizard, but he practices essentially the OTO or Golden Dawn. He views magic in its highest form as art, the creation of something that affects people. So whether it's his comic books or whether it's fine art or fine music or even just emotional music, that is magic because it is affecting change on the world.
Well, and then if you look at it in that way, look at how many musicians, artists, writers, they become the magic wand, if you will, right? Because many of the best will tell you that they will have an idea or they'll look at a blank canvas and it's as though something moves through them, something that's living and breathing out there moves through them onto the canvas, onto the paper, onto the piano or the guitar, and they become a conduit. So that is a form of magic as well. We're tapping into these different legacies of the information that surrounds us at all times, and it's just how attuned you are to these different aspects to what you might be able to create.
Absolutely. And I think many people who are creatives and have experimented in creation of music or visual art can tell you or speak to that idea of being a channel in that moment and just having something come through them. I guess we would talk about it as speaking to your muse or being inspired, but it is almost like a channeling state where you're kind of harnessing these forces that seem to be outside of what you traditionally view as self. It's exciting.
It is.
And it's not to say, I mean, there are obviously authors and musicians that have a thread. They get something that triggers them, but then it expands from there, right? Like the universe continually growing from that one little germ of an idea that populates, and then that becomes something because now it becomes an incantation that we're all singing at concerts and pumping our fist to, or we're standing in front of at the Louvre and looking at these magnificent works of art that move us to emotions. A painting, a piece of canvas with splattered colors, and it's something that can physically move us. There is a magic in that.
Oh, definitely. And some of the earliest, I would say, some of the earliest magical groups within the United States that had during the occult revival in the U.S., where we're talking about the emergence of Crowley's like kind of Masonic grade schools or his magical schools. They have rippling effects where most of the people in those schools or those magical traditions ended up becoming proficient artists and very, very prolific artists, to the point where we have basically almost the entire surrealist movement coming out of automatic writing, which is a very bold claim to make. And yet, if you look at those artists, many of them were directly involved in either spiritualism or spiritism or the occult, and just weren't talking about it, but it was informing their work. It was informing their art.
Well, let's focus a little bit on the art of the seance and the art of channeling, the art of music, the art of muse, if you will, and communicating with the dead. Because the more broad scale I'm looking at this, where I used to be focused on one aspect of a paranormal moment, the further out I get, it does seem that these things are all tied together. When communicating as a medium, you're looking right now at Dave Schrader. You two are going to do a reading for me, a session. And I'm curious, do you think there are different elements to the reading as opposed to my mom standing behind me saying, tell him to brush his teeth and wear clean underwear? Is that really the ghost of my mom? Or is that kind of an esoteric Rolodex of information that just lives within me from all the things I've heard from my mother? So there are things that are no less magical that you're able to tap into and read, but you're almost like a Snoop bot on the internet, right? You know, as long I've left cookies and you guys are just reading the cookies as it goes along.
Right.
Or is there a mixture of both?
Yeah, you're talking about, is this kind of psi? Am I picking up on you, or am I tapping into this kind of body of knowledge that's accessible to us all? Or am I actually talking to a deceased loved one? I am open to different theories. One thing I will say from doing this is that there are different personalities that come through. So what it feels like and appears like to me is that these discarnate spirits are speaking to me. But it is interesting to think about how exactly this works, and that really sort of depends on what your view of consciousness and reality is.
I think in many ways it's kind of like the oft-cited double slit experiment, where depending on what was being viewed by researchers, the atoms and protons behaved in different ways based off of what was being measured. And for Kat and I know when I'm doing a reading and something comes to me, there have been times where I've tasted things in a reading, and maybe that's psi. Like maybe I'm literally doing some kind of telepathy and picking up on the taste that the person had who I'm reading for when they were eating and sharing a meal with their departed loved one. So maybe that is psi. But then there are times where the messages that come through are very clear, and they don't seem to reflect an entirety of that person's worldview in life. So in a very prominent example that always springs to mind, there was a woman who we were reading for who had a lot of concerns. She was very close with her grandparents. They passed, and she went off and is living and leading her life the way she wants to. And she was very much feeling that she wanted their approval because she loved them and she was very close to them. And the message that came through for me was of her grandmother, and I got all of this associated imagery with that, of her job and of her the way she braided her hair and how her name and who she was like related to, and all the things that come through in an evidential kind of experience of mediumship. And then the message was very much aligned around like, I don't understand why you're doing these things, but we are still very much supporting you. We still very much love you. If this is what makes your life work, if this is what you need, then we feel we must support you. And so in that, she had never heard those things from her grandmother. She has no waking memory of that. So I wasn't picking up on a memory of that. It was a message that was clearly channeled. Maybe that's due to some kind of higher consciousness, some kind of life review. It may just be that ancestors really do want the best for us, and they have a little bit more context.
But now looking at the science of us as humans, they're finding that we have genetic memory from the past. Animals obviously do. They know to get up. They know which direction to fly and which way to come back. They inherently know things. So if you're connecting with my bloodline, the people that matter to me, that would seem like a stronger connection because, again, are you reading the genetic makeup? And you would be getting their emotions. You would be getting them because they're a part of who we are and what we create. And I'm not trying to take away from the fact that mom's really here talking to you and giving you insights. I believe that's a deep aspect, but I just wonder how many different wheels are turning to make this magic happen, right? That it's partly mom. Sometimes it's the flashes or images, which are the downloaded screenshots of our life that you're getting to connect us to the being, the energy that is around us at all times. So I just find it fascinating. But then you could say, well, but your girlfriend came through and you weren't blood related to her. At least we hope not. I'm not here to judge Kentucky, but if if you've got that connection, how are they connecting to you? How is that the same thing? So if people are interested, and I know many of them here are interested in trying to communicate with the dead, what are some ways that you would suggest that, especially if they're going to go see a medium, what are some of the best ways for them before they even get to you to make this as easy as possible, not for you, but for the spirits, and make this a conducive communication?
Absolutely. Well, I guess invocation of the dead. It sounds very witchy, but it can be as simple as putting their picture out, lighting a candle for them, meditating on your memories with them, and even meditating on what you'd like to communicate about. Whenever we're telling people how they can connect with spirit right now, we usually suggest sleeping on it.
Literally.
We suggest before going to bed, either write down or say aloud who you'd like to speak with and what you'd like to speak about, and you kind of hold that in your mind, and then you go to sleep. And it doesn't always happen the first night, but usually people are able to have that conversation. So it's really easy actually to have spirit communication, spirit contact. And it does really happen to people more often than you might think.
Yeah, that's what I was going to add is I feel like whether you're doing a actual magical working, or you're trying to manifest something, or you're trying to communicate with spirits, departed loved ones, one of the things we have to do is to relearn, I should say, how to play, relearn how to think magically, how to make these logical leaps. Because as a child, you're very good at it. You're very good. You have an incredible imagination. And how many times do we hear parents tell stories about their child saying, I spoke with granddad last night. And there's no way you spoke with granddad. He died before you were born. Those are things that we see in the literature consistently. So relearning how to let those things happen without the, I would say, the adult brain or the respectability brain coming in and say, you didn't actually think that. And if you tell anyone that, you're nuts. Just allow those things to happen, catalog them. You don't have to believe in them, just observe them and be like, hey, this is something that happened, or this is something that I can at least sit with. It's relearning how to give ourselves grace.
I like that, right? And it's important to empower ourselves. We don't give ourselves, I think, nearly enough credit for how powerful we are as a unit and what we can do. And I think the biggest problem is I might be able to sit here and meditate and commune with the spirits, but there's always that part of you that's like, dude, you're so high. Why are you just want it so bad? It's grieving. You're processing, man. That wasn't real. So if I go to the Eckharts and you say it, then it's like, okay, I've got my collaboration, right? I've got you telling me this. So I kind of already knew that, but I need somebody that's not me to tell me it's okay to believe that this is the message.
Exactly. And that's really what the medium is. They are literally a medium for communication. Tarot cards can be a medium. A pendulum can be a medium. Physical people can be mediums. And I think we all have that ability to receive and to listen. And you might call it your gut or your intuition or angelic visitation. But I do think we all have that gut ability or that instinctual ability to connect.
Do you ever connect with a relative, as you're sitting there doing a reading for Dave and my mom's in the background going, I'm not here. Tell him I'm not here. Do you ever have spirits that are like, no, just leave me alone. I'm fishing. I'm watching the whole new Soprano season over here in heaven that they, we didn't get on Earth. Is there any kind of break like that for the spirits? Do they ever wave you off?
There's one that's just pops to mind. Kat, you have to tell it.
Okay.
It's amazing. It was.
So we were doing a reading in a group reading session, and this was online at this point. And I was connecting to, I think, someone's departed mother. And I knew she was there, and I could get a sense of her personality, but I was really kind of struggling to get a communication or a message from her. And it might have been my mistake. I might have pushed a little too much because I was like, tell me, come on, tell me. And then we got kicked out of our own Zoom meeting.
Yeah. We got kicked out of our own Zoom meeting. All of a sudden I thought, oh no, the app Zoom has crashed. What's going on? So I reload Zoom, log back in, everybody's still there, and they're laughing hysterically. And at this point I'm like, well, you need to let us in on the joke. Like, what's going on here? And the woman who we were reading for said, well, my mother hates mediums. Whenever we would go to the boardwalk, she would look and see those mediums and say, that's disgusting. I can't believe those people do that. And so she just wasn't having any of it. And that was, for the person who we were reading for, this incredible confirmation, because she was like, that's my mom. Like, I know she's out there. I'm glad she's out there. She doesn't want to talk to me through you guys.
But what does that tell you? Isn't that weird? Because you would think that there's been enlightenment on the other side. Mom would know it's okay. And if she doesn't, does that mean you are the devil? We'll answer that question and more. Stay tuned. We got to take a quick break. We'll come back more with the best in paranormal podcasting. I'm Dave, and this is Darkness Radio. Welcome back to the program. This is the best in paranormal podcasting, Darkness Radio. For those of you watching our live video stream, did you know we have a podcast every week, 3 to 4 times a week? As a matter of fact, whatever podcast tool you use will help you find that show. Sometimes you're just too lazy to look for a podcast tool, so maybe you just grab your phone, just like this. This is my phone. That's my grandson, Declan. And you just say, hey, Google, play the newest episode of Darkness Radio. I said, hey, Google. Google. Of course, the one time I need it, it's not working. But you just ask your smart device to play the newest episode of Darkness Radio, and it should launch a brand new episode. But you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher. You can even find us on Amazon Music and on Audible. There's places to find us everywhere. We are like mold in your basement. Every time you think you've washed us away, we'll just pop up on another form. And you can find the show very easily if you go to your Play Store and download the free Darkness Radio app. It's real simple. You see that handsome fellow right over my shoulder? Well, that's Scully. If you just look up Darkness Radio on any of your apps, devices, you'll find the Darkness Radio app, and you can take us along with you anywhere and listen to the best in paranormal podcasting. There's great information, a lot of fun on that. So please think about subscribing, keep up with us. And I want to remind you, if you want the show without commercials, then it's easy. You can go to Stitcher and get the Stitcher Premium app. It's $5 a month. But Dave, I don't want to pay $5 a month for your show. Well, first of all, that hurts my feelings, and screw you. Second of all, you don't get just Darkness Radio. You get Darkness Radio. You get our True Crime Tuesday podcast. Still not enough for you? Boy, you people are needy. Well, you get every other show under the Stitcher umbrella. That's right. Hundreds of thousands of different programs and programming features. You get it all commercial free for $5 a month. So if you're interested, go to Stitcher Premium. Otherwise, keep listening to me free right here on the regular podcast forms that you listen to. But for those of you that don't have time and need that extra 4 to 5 minutes back of your life that you didn't have to listen to commercials, then go ahead and get Stitcher Premium and keep up with it. Guys, I got some exciting news. We are just a few weeks away from the biggest and best Paracon of the year, the Michigan Paracon. This is their 11th season of doing the paranormal conference. Of course, last year we all had to take the year off, but it's back this year. It's a great program. miparacon.com is the website. michiganparacon.com. You'll find all the information there. There are a ton of speakers. A lot of your favorite paranormal TV celebrities will be there. Podcast hosts, even some TV and movie people have popped in from time to time. So make sure that you check it out for yourself. I think they've got comedy. That's right. Dean Haglund from The Lone Gunman and The X-Files is going to be on hand with a comedy show and doing his podcast live, I believe, from the conference. So there's a lot of cool stuff going on. Go check out miparacon.com. Come on out and join us. Today we are here. We're talking with the Eckharts, Dan and Kat. If you're watching the video, you can figure out who's who. Witchcraft, magic, and the art of necromancy is our topic today. So before the break, guys, I threw out to the fact that if the spirit's not wanting to talk to you because they think mediums are evil, what does that say? And I don't mean to throw you under the bus, but I know everybody listening is going, whoa, hold the phone. So they didn't want that should be the verification you're not evil, because they will come through you.
Yeah. I think
I like that answer. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, there is a sustained part of personality that people will hold on to after they've passed. And that is something we see, that there is an element of what makes that person who they are. And it might also just not be the right time. They might be caught up in a past life review of some kind. They might not just be ready to have that kind of communication. We see on the other side of the coin spirits that are aggressive in wanting to come through. Spirits of, and these are generally like departed loved ones who maybe passed early with like poor relationships with their family. And they desperately want to make up. They desperately want some kind of absolution or to just make that connection that they couldn't make in life.
Right.
And on the flip side of the coin, the family who's still living sometimes says, ooh, just really not ready to talk with this person. They did a lot of harm. And on the other end, the spirit's saying, I know I did. Please just let me. No, we're not ready yet. So maybe there just is some kind of give and take between where we are now and where the spirits are now. Most of the spirits we speak with seem to really do want to talk with us. Occasionally, though, there's always one or two that seem that it's not yet their time.
Do you do it in tandem, the two of you doing it, or do you book individually?
Oh, we do it together. So
is there ever
things?
Yeah, I was going to say, is there ever times that the spirits are like, I'm not talking to Kat. Dan, let me tell you what's going on, or vice versa? Do you get that where the spirit will shut down one of you but talks to the other fluently?
I don't think we have that so much as certain spirits are kind of drawn to one or the other of us. Sometimes we tap into the same spirit, but I think it's normally kind of alternates, and it really works well for us because Dan receives messages in certain ways and I receive them in other ways, and I can take some time to really suss out what a message is before I'm ready to speak on it. And Dan's a talker, so he expresses it immediately.
But that's the gift, right? You're a medium. You're supposed to be a talker. That's what you're doing. You're helping spirits communicate. Now, I know that before the show, Dan, you and I chatted online and you had some cool stories, and I just threw my phone with all my notes over my shoulder. So I don't have those notes now in front of me, but maybe you could tell us. You said you had a couple of fascinating new experiences pop up, and please, you have the floor, sir, and I'm going to give you full screen for just a few seconds while I go back and grab my phone.
No problem. So very recently, actually, we were called in to consult on a paranormal investigation. And this is something that happens, I would say, with relative frequency at this point. People like to have us to provide some background on both, it could be folk practices or ritual practices around spirit communication, especially as we move into this world where technology in spirit investigation and ghost hunting is lauded, and so is the felt, so is the medium's experience, so is magic. As magic kind of comes into the fore, you see more and more people interested in engaging with that within their paranormal investigations. But recently we were called to a very, very old building. The building was built in 1755, so it's quite old, and it had a recent addition in 1866, so it's an old building. And the owners had always known that there was haunted activity there. It had been investigated multiple times by various different Maryland paranormal investigation teams. And it was actually one of the places where we've had a few encounters that were actually really neat. One specifically was we made contact with a spirit. And this was how long ago? 2 or 3 years ago?
I don't know what you're about to say.
Yeah, I know, right? I think it was about 2 or 3 years ago when we were in there.
So she's not a psychic, just a medium, is what you're saying. You're not reading his mind? I got you. Okay.
It answers the question that we always get. Like, It's a married couple. Are you always reading each other's mind? No. I still don't do the dishes.
Can't
sometimes.
handle that.
Sometimes. I got you. All right, please go ahead.
Yeah, so we both felt the spirit of this younger woman there, and we got the name Harriet. And then a psychic medium from Gettysburg came down a few days later. We didn't tell them anything about this space, and the psychic medium came in and said, I'm getting this image and this feeling of this spirit, a younger girl. It seems like a Harriet. And for Kat and I, that was just an incredible confirmation that, again, we're not crazy, and this is something that seems to be happening here. So the owners reported consistent kind of low level, I would call it fun paranormal experiences. Things walking around on the second floor, like they would hear footsteps. Or sometimes lights would be left on where they had turned them off, and they knew for sure that no one had been in the space.
So the name Harriet, was that the actual name, or were you just throwing that out there?
Oh, it was then the actual name, yes.
Well, the only reason I ask is I have a new grandchild coming at the end of this month, and if it's a girl, it's Harriet. If it's a boy, it's Virgil. But it was just, I don't ever hear the name Harriet. So
yes.
Yeah, very cool. I was like, if you're pulling that out of your head, man, get out of my head, all right?
Yeah, I think that came. Yeah, I don't think that's coming from you, but that's an incredible. I love that synchronicity. Yeah. So the activity had always been pretty low level, and the owners kind of joked about it a little nervously, but joked about it. And then with the pandemic and the lockdown, there was a lot of activity at the business where they were changing things. They were classically going through a remodel at the time. They were adding in a new office, expanding some distilling equipment. So there was a lot going on there. And people were keeping weird hours. It was a classic case of like anti-structure. Because the bar side of the building wasn't open, the owners could come and go with just strange hours, essentially. Check on their equipment, make sure everything was going according to plan, and then leave, or maybe spend a whole day there doing office work or working on the renovation. And over the course of that, the paranormal activity began to pick up and it began to intensify. And then things kind of went sideways. It went from, oh, there's maybe somebody's up there walking around, haha, to there's banging across the entire length of the building from the second floor. Their employees would go outside after locking up the entire business, turning out all the lights. And as they were driving driving down the street, see all the lights on the second floor turn themselves on. So they were like, this is wild.
Yeah.
Then the owners began to report the kind of stuff that we see with misplaced items, placing things down, just not being able to find it, looking for it for hours, and then coming back and it was exactly where they knew they put it. And it peaked with like icy spots, essentially, where they would be, again, in like June, very hot month, on the second floor of this 150-year-old building, 250-year-old building, 1775. A 200-year-old building, second floor, no AC, and it would be sweltering until they walked into one spot and it would be frigid. So they called some paranormal investigators out and they all said, yeah, there's something weird here. They got on the phone with some mediums and they spoke to a remote viewer in California who said, oh, I can see, everything that's going on and I've dismissed the spirits. And they spoke with a few mediums who said, oh yeah, we helped it cross over. And it just kind of continued to intensify. So
now, I run into a lot of mediums that do that. They, from a distance, I helped them cross over. Mm-hmm. Now, I have some very talented mediums I work with who have made those claims on our show. We've connected listeners with them, and I've never once heard anybody come back and go, they didn't clear my house. Everybody's always had pretty good, but I do a lot of events all around the United States, and people are always, I cleared it. And do the spirits sometimes like, yeah, okay, bye. I'm going to the light now. I'll see it. And then they go around the corner, and then as soon as you walk out, they come strolling back out again. Is it just to kind of placate the medium at times?
I wonder, because I've had those experiences that you're speaking to where you work with someone who's very talented or very in tune and something does click and they don't report anything else. And then similarly, people have said, yeah, I've had, psychics out here, I've had mediums out here, and it seems to stay the same, or worst case scenario, it does get worse.
Okay. So, but they had tried multiple times to clear this property and end this chaotic energy. All right.
Yeah. So we went and we anticipated that we would essentially just walk through the space. We were familiar with this space. We had maybe some ideas as to what could be causing it, especially when we heard about the anti-structure, the renovations, that sort of thing. We felt like that ticked some boxes. And we decided to hold a seance, which is our preferred way of communicating with spirits. It is the thing we love to do. And it was one of the most nerve-wracking and over-the-top experiences we've ever had. It was anxious is the best way to describe it. From the moment we got there, a feeling of not fear, but just anxiety, and anxiety on the part of a third person. So we felt like this anxiety emanating from like a spirit. Like the spirit itself seemed anxious. There was the sound of things falling in other rooms while we were doing the seance that then we could no longer find anything that had fallen over. There was banging again of downstairs and around there's a third level. There was banging in the third level. And ultimately, after the course of nearly 3 hours, we said, okay, well, we need an answer on what's going on here. We need to know what's happening. And we got the impression very strongly, again, that this was related directly to Harriet, someone who had been in the space for a very long time. And with that anxiety, after we kind of said, like, listen, you can't just keep acting out. Like, we know you're here. What do you need? What needs to happen? And the anxiety seemed to be coming from this idea that they were being misplaced or replaced, that there was no longer a space for them that they've attached themselves to. There was the building that they had been a part of for however long was literally being taken away from them. And so our recommendation was to leave them a section of the space, to literally say, we're going to designate a section of this property that is for you. and the current owners will never disturb it. We'll never come back. It's just for you. What do you need? This is a distilling operation. We felt very drawn via pendulum to some of the alcohol, felt very drawn to bourbon. And so it's my kind of spirit.
Right.
And so on the third floor in the attic, we cast a circle. We made a small shelf and altar space there. We opened up a bottle of bourbon to leave there as tribute for the spirit. And we packed it up and we said, that's it. And over the next week, things began to die down. And now it's back to that kind of like playful, or at least generally like tolerable manifestation or activity.
I've got a weird concept to throw out to you. And I know you guys are into the weird. So open your minds for me for a few moments.
Sure.
We keep talking about how when people renovate a home, all hell breaks loose. Mm-hmm. And it just struck me as you're telling me that you're hearing things crash and fall and bang, and you go in the room and there's nothing there. Does it make you wonder if in altering the home now, is it affecting the energy in the past? Am I sitting here and that's why all of a sudden a picture falls off my wall, is because they're banging on the wall on the other side, tearing it out. And it's just this moment of time slip phenomena. And the reason it kind of calms down is once you've stopped, their basic structure is fine again, but it's the disturbance that's sending shockwaves back to them, or maybe even into the future. So the crashing and banging you're hearing is you knocking shit off the shelves when they're living there.
Right. It's a great theory. And because spirit time doesn't seem to be linear, at least in our encounters with spirit, it's a possibility that we should entertain, I think.
I get all these ideas thanks to medical marijuana. I'm Dan Schrader for medical marijuana. No, it really just struck me because I think of how many times when you're disrupting the energy pattern, we're thinking we're disrupting it now. That's what's pissing the ghosts off. But it might be because we're impacting whichever side, future or past, that they're on, and it's creating trouble. And they're hearing the footsteps of the workers and the banging on the wall, and it's disturbing their energy. Yeah. So, boy, it's so curious. That's why I love this, because there's no answer, right? There's probably no one answer. It could be 100 variations of these things.
Yeah. And I feel like for Harriet, this spirit has personality, has distinct personality, but we have to wonder, like, why is Harriet in this space? Like, we haven't found any bodies of the promises. We haven't found any unresolved indications of trauma. So what would link a spirit to this specific? And in this case, a very obvious, this is and always has been a business location. Throughout its entire history, it was never a home. It wasn't like Harriet was born there or something.
It isn't now. No. But again, I just mentioned my granddaughter could be born and be named Harriet. Yeah. The names are cyclical. We like to think of the hauntings coming from the past. Maybe Harriet dies there as a worker in the future. Maybe something happens that, she has a heart attack on the work floor, and her energy, as you said, there's no linear time for spirits. And maybe that's what's going back and forth. So we're not finding a Harriet attached to the site. Well, you're not going to, because she's not there yet. Yeah. But her spirit doesn't know. She's kind of zipping back and forth like, what the hell's going on?
I love that. And there's this element of co-creation too. So like we haven't seen this with Harriet, but people will say like, oh, I saw this ghost in Victorian or Edwardian garb. That may be how you saw that spirit or got the mental image of that spirit. But maybe the reason you see it that way is literally because that's how the spirit expected to be seen, in that there's
your expectations.
Like
that's really awesome, because if I ask everybody right now in the chat room, all three of you, if I ask you right now, think of a ghost haunting. What is the most commonly reported haunting? It's always late 1800s to early 1920s, right? It's that kind of wheelhouse that those spirits exist. Is it because, for the same reason we don't see naked ghosts, we're projecting our expectations? So, and listen, folks, I'm going to get real sciencey with you. You don't have to believe me on this. Look it up. This is cool shit, right? Our brain fills things in optically. right? Things can pass right in front of you without you seeing. There's an awesome video. Dr. Michael Shermer shares at a lot of the different conferences from Skeptical Inquirer, Skeptic Magazine. He will do this experiment where he shows two teams, a red team and a blue team of basketball players, and they're bouncing a ball back and forth. And he asks, how many times did the blue team bounce the ball back and forth? And you have to count it. And then he goes, did anybody notice anything interesting? And people are like, yeah, they did it 13. No, it was 15 times. But did anything else interesting happen? Well, yeah, the blue team never really touched the ball. But did anything else? And what they didn't even notice is when he plays the video back, a guy dressed as a gorilla walks into the center of the screen and stands there while they're bouncing the ball around. People are so focused on one aspect, they blind themselves to something glaringly obvious. So it very well could be that aspect of us projecting onto them the clothing from the period we think they should be. You know, and it must be interesting to the ghost if they're legitimately haunting and they're from the future or from, you know, the Fonz with his flipped collar in the 50s, you know, and he's like, hey, I'm not dressed in Renaissance garb. What are these people talking about right there? That's the projection aspect of the whole concept. That's really an interesting take on it, Dan.
Yeah. And I think that can I think that can often contribute to some of the more negative cases people have with haunting experiences or paranormal experiences. Not simply because they expect maybe ghosts to be scary, and so ghosts are much more scary, but also that must be a frustrating experience for that spirit. And how then does the spirit communicate if that communication is already difficult? There must be more emotion, there must be more energy put into it. And as we kind of interpret these things, you know, the picture falling off the wall becomes the picture was thrown across the room. And then what happened next? Like, what could possibly be the next thing to drop? I think we do kind of make our paranormal situations often worse than they need to be simply because of that frame.
Here's an interesting thought too. Everybody always asks, and here's the point popping up from Claire Marshall, a lady in white. There's always a lady in white. Claire, there's always a lady in white, a lady in blue, and a lady in gray. And of course you get the black. But isn't it interesting that those are different shades? Now, folks, please pay attention to Dan's glasses. You'll note that the screen is reflecting blue off his glasses, right? Because of the way the light reflects or refracts off of the glasses. The screen he's looking at is not blue. It's white, blue, red, green. It's got all these different color aspects. So maybe the shimmering is the ghost you're seeing at that time has sunlight on them, or whatever time frame they're walking in, you're seeing that envelopment around them. Or because they're so old, that memory, that faint deal is all you're getting is white or shades of gray or a dark black, depending on what level of existence it still is being seen on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely a possibility.
Sure, Dave, possibly.
No, I'm just so excited by this topic of conversation. I'm also thinking of if our expectations are shaping what we're perceiving, is it also possible that spirits are projecting certain things, or we are both kind of creating that? And I know Annie Besant had some work around color and what color evokes and means, and she called them thought forms. And I wonder if the white is just an appearance of I am a safe person, or I am the specific type of woman, like female, a safe, what word am I thinking? Benevolent.
Now I can read your mind.
Very nicely done. No, yeah. That's a great aspect of it as well. Julie Haddis brings up the fact, maybe that's why you catch things on the video camera that you didn't see with the naked eye, because again, you're so trained to see the house as it is, you're not noticing the light variances. That's why, to tell you the truth, honestly, that's why we ghost hunt in the dark on TV. The chances of a light anomaly are much better for me to notice in a darkened area than it is in a fully lit, bright room. You might not notice the translucent nature or something moving about you that, you know, the light would not wrap around. But in the dark, if it's its own light form or whatever energy that it is, you'll be able to see something a little bit more readily. So that is a good point as well. Thank you for bringing that up. And if you have questions for our guests, you can feel free to chime in. I'll try to throw them up onto the screen as we're going along on tonight's program as well. I love just kind of spinning off into all the different aspects of what could be, because I I don't think we should ever get complacent that this is what it is. This is what a ghost is.
Mm-hmm.
People are so terrified of shadow people, right? But we've all heard the saying, he's a shadow of the man he once was, right? Maybe that's really the energy that's left. Is it's now, instead of this bright, vibrant figure of Dave Schrader that you see roguishly handsome sitting in front of you, I've just become a darkened fit. Why are you two laughing about that? That's not funny. But maybe it's just that shadow of what I once was that's still there. It's an echo as opposed to a fully formed energy being.
And those again, those echoes or those shadowy figures can take on different personas or different experiences based off of what we expect. Because growing up, I had a lot of issues with like shadowy figures, shadow people, shadow things, and they were terrifying. I was convinced that they were some kind of, whether it be like aliens or demonic intrusion or something like that. I had myself worked up. Once I started engaging with different schools of thought around the esoteric, around the paranormal, working with Kat on in training like mediumistic ability or leaning into that skill, there was no presentation in that way. Like, as I said, even when we went into this space with this very kind of fraught energy, it was easy for both of us to identify, well, I'm not the one who's scared here. This is coming from something else. This isn't me having this visceral, anxious reaction. The anxious reaction is coming from something else. There's a distance that we can kind of institute.
Could that fear be from the spirit that's seeing you? If we're a slip in time to them, is that sudden rush of, well, obviously we've got fear, false evidence appearing real. We've got that fear of the unknown, seeing something that we didn't expect. But then I've talked to most people. I go, once you get past that, the shock and awe, are you really afraid? And it's funny how many people will see shadow people in their room, and once they kind of see it and acknowledge it, they can close their eyes and go back to sleep. But if you wake up, Kat, and I'm standing at the end of your bed eating a peanut butter sandwich, I'm betting you're not just going to look up at me and go, Dave Schrader. Right? You're going to be giving the husband an elbow and going, get him out of here. Right? That's what it's going to be. So there must be something to that it might be what that being is emoting that you're picking up on as an empathetic human being as well. Yeah. It's an energy exchange, right?
It is, yeah. And I think as empathetic people, like certain emotions, especially strong ones, are catching. And this happens with living people in the material world all the time without us really acknowledging or noticing it sometimes. Yeah.
We've got a nice comment for you here, Mr. Eckhart. Oh, Ms. Eckhart. Nasaba says, I like how Ms. Eckhart said that the reality feeling image is created by spirit and the individual. That's awesome points again. And look, people are paying attention. They're writing notes. We should be, this is copyrighted. This entire thing, all of our thoughts are copyrighted. Yeah, no, I guess I can't do that at this point. But how do you know when you really are coming against something malevolent, truly evil, as opposed to confused, frightened, irritable, right? I mean, let's face it. As a human, I'm kind of a cranky asshole, right? So as a ghost, I'm probably going to be a cranky asshole, right? So if I decide to stay around, they say, as in life, so in death, right? There's that part. If I'm earthbound, I'm probably going to be more me than I would be the enlightened, Dave, right? So how do we start to differentiate? That's what I try to talk people through when they tell me they're afraid they're having a demonic haunting. Is that what I try to get to the root of why? And then sometimes when you take them, you de-escalate them, they realize, well, I guess it's really not that terrifying after all. It's just unexpected might be the right term. Yeah. But what should we look for? Obviously, if there's a smell of sulfur, right? If you find yourself not 3 little scratches across your chest, but gashed open and bleeding and hemorrhaging, bruise marks in that shape of hands and things appearing on your body, that to me seems like that would be a pretty good indication. But are there other aspects? And is there anything that you know in the different religions and belief systems and witchcraft that would denote these are always clues to the fact that this is something much more malevolent?
Yeah, well, you brought up 2 of good ones. If they're actually hurting you, like in a tangible way. And if you are getting these kind of traditional, really bad smells that don't seem to come from anywhere and you cannot get rid of. I think other things that are important are the individual's experience with this and how persistent it is. I do think that there are different entities, sort of classifications. I think that is a helpful thing when we're approaching paranormal investigations. And so we don't often come up against things that are just terribly malevolent. I'm trying to think of when
I've got, let me mention this because Donna Abbott asks, okay, Dave Schrader, what was that energy that knocked you down into Shane on the TV show, The Holzer Files? For those of you that haven't seen it, it was season 1, I think, first episode we filmed. So I think it was like the second or third episode of the season at the Whaley house. I get hit from the side. It looks like I get lifted up and slammed into Shane, and I hit the ground like an old 50-year-old sack of potatoes. Listen, it would have been really easy to jump down into the fact that it was evil or that it was the devil or a demon. And once I cleared my head of just trying to get past the idea of something actually having an energy to do that, like I've said before, I believe you might be touched. You might feel the tug on the shirt or a tug on your hair. But to be hit and pushed and shoved has always been kind of a far out concept for me. I know people on TV. I'm friends with these people. I don't question that that's their experience. It's hard for me because I haven't had that experience yet. So when it hit me, right, the first thought is, oh shit, the devil's here, right? Mm-hmm. Oh boy. But what I realized was this guy, this spirit that we were calling out. And I've mentioned it on the show in the past, so I apologize for those of you that have heard this before. This spirit was angry. We were calling him out. He's been in the dark for so long, and then we're evoking him. We're calling him. Are you the one that pushed Violet Whaley to commit suicide? Bringing up some very dark subjects for this being. Does it mean it was evil? No, maybe it was just really frustrated and pissed off, because remember, Juan Verdugo was the hero of his own story. Not in some far-fetched way, but when they were coming back to steal back what belonged to their people, they were heroes. Just like we're heroes when we stormed the beach at Normandy. We're heroes. To the Germans, we're a bunch of assholes. We were a bunch of, we were bad guys. We were the guys they had to stop. Everybody's got a different perspective. But in Juan Verdugo's sake, we took that land. We encroached and threw people out and treated people horribly. And he came back to take it back. And how was he treated? He was hung and killed. And the rest of his team, murdered. And one had to dig his own grave and stand in front of it as they shot him. And he fell into the grave, and then they buried him. So there was a lot of disrespect. So once we went back and we acknowledged that, they haven't had problems. I kept in touch with Dean and the I was so worried because kids go there on field trips. I'm like, Jesus, did we just uncork the genie? I don't want some little 8-year-old in there. Well, during the Whaley's time, this was a store. Wah! And he goes flying across the room because Juan Verdugo's pissed off. No, we showed the respect. We apologized. I spoke to him. I spoke to them. I said, if there's ever a problem, we'll come back. We'll bring Native American medicine men. We'll bring Hispanic spiritualists, whoever you think would be best. We'll come in and try to communicate and help the spirit to move on, to forgive and forget and do what it takes. So I don't believe he was evil. I don't think it was demonic in any way, shape, or form. But it scared the shit out of me. And it did when I got knocked over at the other house and when I got bit on the arm. But again, listen, I was encroaching on their place. What would you do if you have subtle energy about you, but you can scare somebody, try to get them out of your house? Maybe that's what they're trying to do, is they're taking a form that they know will creep you out in hopes you won't keep bothering them.
I feel very strongly with what you're saying, because in our experience, there hasn't been a lot of what I would call truly just purely evil energies or entities. And I think that perspective you share is really refreshing and helpful, because, when you got pushed, as you said, you're like, oh, the devil's here. And then we become super defensive. We're like, hey, you can't push me. Like, I'm going to wreck you now. Like, that's how it goes.
The power of Christ compels you, right?
Right. So, which, as you can imagine, introducing that into a space like, let's say, where there's indigenous or native peoples, and you come in shouting about the power of Christ compelling you, there's a lot of cultural memory there for that spirit that's not so good about things like that it might react negatively towards. So I think most of people's experiences with negative paranormal experience or negative haunting experiences where things are, and I don't want to say that they're not, where things are bad, where things are uncomfortable, do really come from a space of trying to engage with and wrap our minds around the intangible and try and have some kind of clear communication where it may not be possible. But truly like exorcist style demonic entities are rare, and they're rare for a reason. I think that very few people are skilled enough or connected enough or steeped enough in those various traditions to work with entities such as that. You often hear about like the Ouija board in this, where people say like, oh, I used the Ouija board and the devil came out. You probably had a really bad experience, and I'm not saying you didn't, but it might be because you were just entirely unprepared to deal with that. You have a lot of programming, a lot of feelings around the evils of the Ouija board, thanks to, at this point, like 40 years of movies about how terrifying it is. Most people who sit down at the Ouija board aren't going to be able to conjure up these kinds of truly terrifying elemental beings.
And if they do, put it back in the box, stick it back in the closet under the game of life, and taunt it. Taunt it with the game of life.
Exactly. And that's the thing that I think provides people with some of the most comfort is if we look at like magical traditions and how they deal with demons. This is one of my favorite things. This is like a hobby horse I will talk about forever. But if you want to magically bottle or stop some sort of like demonic energy, something truly negative, you can bind it to a task. And historically, we look at various different magical texts where they would bind these demonic entities that were causing all sorts of issues to a task like, you have to go now and count every single pebble on the bottom of the ocean. And then the manifestations would end. And so this is like, there is that element of how terrifying the paranormal is, but then that element of how easy it can be sometimes to work through it. Like, it's not hard for us to go and command, an entity to go and count every grain of sand on the beach. It sounds ridiculous, but in those rare instances, it's actually brought relief to people who have had really negative experiences.
And by the time they're done, you're dead already. So they're haunting the next family, right?
Exactly. Not my problem for the next 1,000 years.
Right. As Rihanna Trudell asks, I hope I said that right. I apologize if I didn't. Has there ever been any time it was so bad while you were investigating that you just left and refused to go back in? Only my teenage daughter's room. I was not willing to go back in at any given time. No, I've always been willing to go back personally. What about you guys? Have you ever been called on an investigation that afterwards you're like, oh, fuck that. No, never again.
We are lucky in that we haven't had that level of bad experience. And I think it's helpful that generally when we're going in, we have already an idea from the witness's point of view, what they were experiencing. So we'll kind of prepare ourselves, both psychically and through like various occult methods. And it really helps that I have a partner in this that I know so well that will kind of support and back me up in everything that we're experiencing. But no, we haven't had anything that we've just not been able to go back.
Part of that is selection. So of course, when a case comes in, when we're requested, like we don't do any of our investigations, our investigative work, we don't accept payment for that. We do that for free. That's something that we feel is a service or something that really can't be charged for, not in the way in which, you pay for a medium's time when they're doing a reading or a seance where there are materials and tools and that sort of thing. Investigation is something we do purely for free. But we are very careful with what tasks we take on. We want to vet these to make sure we're not walking into a domestic situation, psychological situation, and we have people who we can then refer them to, like trauma-informed therapists, individuals who work with, domestic situations, etc. So we're often coming in with a leg up. We don't just go and like spelunk in abandoned buildings.
No, that's good. Do you what do you do then when you do come up against something truly unhappy, truly negative? What's your best course of action?
Yeah, I think the first step is generally education. So for the people who are involved, we want to tell them that there's very, very, very slim chance that whatever this is can cause you physical lasting harm. Generally, there's very slim chance that it will actually cause you any harm. But if it's causing you distress, we can see what we can do about it. From there, it's encountering and giving that person time to work through and try various levels of approach with the situation. So what happens if you ignore it for a week? What happens if you just say, no, I'm just ignoring this activity? What happens if you take on a very structured lifestyle?
So you're ghosting the ghost?
You're ghosting the ghost. Because oftentimes these things will feed off of the attention we give it, the energy we give it. So, and again, what happens if you have a very structured life? What happens if you just start waking up when the alarm rings and you have activities stacked, and you're so stacked you fall asleep at the end of the day and sleep through until your alarm goes off? And then for us, it's really about, Kat, some of the tools we use.
Well, first off, if something is happening to us in the moment, I will sort of shut it off or kind of mellow out the contact or connection, because, and we try to tell this to everyone, you are in control of what you're receiving. You can tell the spirit that you don't want any more contact, or you don't want to feel this thing that they're getting you to feel. There's been instances where I felt like back pain or other types of pain, and I acknowledge that. And I think part of acknowledging that is helpful to the spirit, and it does resolve something, not all things, because if they're giving you pain and there's a whole lot going on there, but I'll almost mellow out the connection and let my mind kind of slide away along that. And then I can get into a place where I'm actually helpful to the other people in the area around us. And we can work with different talismans or tools. We like to work with tools that people already use, that they prefer, and that they believe in, because that makes them work stronger for the family or the people encountering that activity.
Exactly. So some of the things we have that we
let me make one quick mention for podcast listeners that aren't watching the video. That wasn't ghostly sounds of banging and scratching you heard. Dan got up for a second from his chair and then returned to the seat. So if I don't mention that, I'm going to have 20 emails. Oh my God, while Kat was speaking, the demons were pounding and you guys didn't even acknowledge it. We heard it. It's just Dan. So
it's just, again, literally the 200-year-old floors in this building they create.
I like it.
So for us, like when we go into a space, as Kat said, if we're dealing with a family that's devoutly Roman Catholic, or devoutly evangelical or devoutly Muslim, we will bring artifacts that make sense to them, because that is what will provide them with that psychodrama power, but also they have real emotional resonance and connection with. And for us, we might use those tools ourselves. Like we have backgrounds and faiths that we hold to that we might find useful in asserting control over the space. I did reach over to grab, this is a Solomonic seal, a little talisman Solomonic seal that I'm holding up there. That is essentially about bringing in only good entities into a space. So providing me with personal protection from anything negative. And of course, we have black salts, which we use, various herbs and sages that we find to be particularly compelling. Mm-hmm. So we can break those out like a break glass in case of emergency kit if we need to.
Cherie Bridges says, Dan and Kat, you're both so young. How long have you been practicing your gifts?
Wow.
We've been doing seances for the longest, and I think that's 3 years. Is that right? 3 years professionally. And seance was really the way in which we embraced the mediumship side of it, because you once you do seance and you kind of raise that energy and begin to communicate with spirits as a group, something clicked in our minds to say, oh, we can do this. Everyone can do this, and we can do this. And there's so many different tools to doing that. So we've been doing that the longest, and then different forms of mediumship, such as automatic writing or mediumship with pendulums and oracles. Since then, sort of gradually leading up to mediumship as people would generally see it during a reading.
Yeah, and I think there's an interesting question within that question for me, which is, yes, we have been doing seances professionally for 3 years, and we've been interested in the paranormal for a long period of time. But how many practices do we have that are unconsciously magical or unconsciously connected that we don't really classify as being so? I know, looking back through like my life, I was always a kid who was very into this concept of visualization and like things which were very new thought. I remember specifically an instance as a child not liking the way something went at school one day and standing in front of a mirror and saying, when I imagine myself going through this mirror, that person on the other side of the mirror, they had a better day than me, and I'm now that person. And that was just a thing that I did as an imaginative child. But now if we look at like mirror magic that's been being practiced for quite a long period of time, that's something that is a magical practice. I didn't know I was doing it. I would never have even said it was magic, but maybe it is. So there is that element of kind of growing into and accepting what we're doing. As Kat said, like once you do a seance and things happen, all of a sudden it became comfortable to say, oh, we're mediums.
Sorry, I'm suddenly being attacked by the spirit of a very cuddly ghost who's decided to paw at my legs and bite me until I lifted her up. So everybody, this is the lovely Morgan. She is pretty sure she needs all my attention till I lift her. Then she wants nothing to do with me, much like my dating life all through high school. Beck asks, Dan and Kat, how do you balance the needs of a person in a haunting situation versus the needs of the ghost? Do you find a lot of time you become a mediator in these situations? Good question, Beck. Thanks.
Yeah, yes to kind of being a bit of a mediator. So when we're approaching investigations, we're trying to resolve a haunting, the first thing we'll do is just talk to the witnesses or the people who are experiencing it. And usually in today's age, we'll do that online or through a meeting. Rarely we get to do it in person at a different location than they're experiencing it. That way we can get an idea of what's going on with them, what's going on elsewhere in their life that might be informing this situation, what are their thoughts on it, and what do they think would help. And then once we've given that focus to that person, if we're able to go to the location, we can focus more on the spirit there.
Yeah. I think, Kat, what you said about what can they do what do they think will help is such a key component, because it gives us an insight into their beliefs and the way they interact with these things. And also that's an intuitive nudge. So if someone says, I've just been so overwhelmed at my job. My job is killing me. I'm just always working. It's always, there are too many demands placed on me, et cetera, et cetera. We can then kind of say like, okay, so what happens if you take a step back from that job component? What happens if you look for something new? What happens if you fulfill that element of you as a person? How then do you change your relation to this anomalous activity? Because sometimes there are ancestors who reach out, spirits who reach out, who are like, hey, I, as let's say an ancestor who immigrated to the United States and worked very hard and did all these things, I, sacrificed my life to give you a better one. And now you're like not even doing what you want. Like that, what happened to me? What was my sacrifice for? And that's come through multiple times for people where they are locked into a position or a physical situation, and spirits are actively trying to say, you should change for the better of you. You should do what you need to do. You should do what you want. And once they resolve that activity kind of dips back down and becomes a little bit more subdued. So it's a holistic approach.
I like that. Catherine Watkins says different belief systems have had very different perspectives on the afterlife. That said, why do you think that those who have passed do not tell us more of what the afterlife is? Is that because to each one of us, the afterlife is something different? That my afterlife and your afterlife may not be anything alike, even if we're devout Christians or devout Muslims or devout Jews, whatever our belief system is what we're going to create in the afterlife? Or is it just so flippin' cool that they don't want to tell us because they're afraid we're going to hurry to try to get over there?
I definitely agree with what you've said, but I also think that part of it is how do you really describe what it is and what someone's perspective is, the discarnate spirit, what they're going through, especially when we're talking out of time and out of space, maybe even out of our own understanding of what reality is. I think the problem is, how do you communicate these things? But also, yes, and Dan's had an interesting experience with a Catholic, someone who was a Catholic in life, who had kind of a specific experience, a specific message about what the afterlife was, that really lined up with kind of Catholic belief.
Yeah, and so when we speak with spirits that have these afterlife experiences, if they do tell us anything, it's often wildly different. So we have had an experience where someone's described something to us as a medium that was sounded very Catholic. But then we've also had people describe, I say people, but the spirits of people describe things that sound very like universal consciousness, or very connected, very new age. So it does seem to be that there's a component of the person involved in that, the component of the spirit. Maybe it's a continuation of that spirit's frame of what they expect. Maybe our consciousness just expects and creates. I think there's interesting research around NDEs, where people report having like near-death experiences and seeing the entity that most aligns with their religious faith at the time of death. There are very few cases reported of people who see someone else's entity show up. It generally seems to be.
What are you doing here?
Exactly. So I think that's really interesting. And I think when we look at what the spiritualist church has communicated, and again, Kat and I are not spiritualists, a lot of the spiritualist writing around Summerland, or the spiritist writing around Summerland, and this kind of idea of where spirits go, that came from a different space, like historically in a different place, than the people sitting around the tables doing seances than that did, because that was very immediate. That like mediumship experience was very much about workaday issues, very much about connecting departed loved ones with the people who were still here. It wasn't until there was an effort to kind of like theologize mediumship that we get these views into like Summerland and Frank L. Baum's work on The Wizard of Oz. So like, I think that's important to note, as the spirit world doesn't seem to want to give us too many answers.
I like that. Hey guys, I want all of the listeners that are on here. Last week we did an intention experiment at the end of the show. I have a new one that I want to do with listeners before we wrap up today. So for those of you that hang in with me, we're going to do something a little different. I'm going to give you a new exercise to try to time travel within yourself to set right what once was wrong. We're going to quantum leap our asses tonight. So I want you to stay true with us. Cameron Pasha popped in, and special guest as well. Cameron, we got to get you on the show. I'd love to have you come on the show as well. It'd just be great to have you and have your perspectives and the work that you've done in the paranormal. So make sure that we connect here soon, my friend. Let me see. What else have we got? I'm trying to keep up with the questions and keep ones in my screen here. Here we go. Cindy Kolb says, Dan and Kat, what are your thoughts on a family ancestry and karma? In other words, events that keep cropping up through generations of families. And do you believe in curses and family curses? Do they get handed down?
Yes, I think so. We were talking earlier about kind of this genetic connection to our ancestry that we have in our bodies. Some people say that we literally have our ancestors in our bodies. So yes, I do think there is trauma that's passed on, and there are things that we could qualify as curses that are kind of passed on in us. I know that's true for me.
Right, well, then that's where we have to have our power again, like we spoke about on last week's show, of reclaiming our power, pushing away those things that do not service us, those things that do not belong to us. They're the family curse. They're the problems of the past. We don't have to take them with us. They may be the luggage that we carry, but like luggage, we can set it down, right? There is a way to break that energetic bond.
Exactly. When we've had experiences where people have asked us about, being cursed. Am I cursed? Is my family cursed? It was actually a call in on Coast to Coast. Someone called in and said, "Am I cursed?" And the end truth that Kat and I feel most strongly is that it's your house, it's your rules. So if you feel that you're cursed, or that there's some kind of curse around you, or something that your family has struggled with, whether that be physical, whether that be addiction, whether that be spiritual, something that's feels outside of yourself, you have the power to break that. You don't need any special ceremony. It might be nice to light a candle and turn it upside down or something like that. It might be a physical sign of your power, but you have all you need to step in and say, I'm not going to be limited by these bonds. I'm not going to let my family's problems define me anymore. I'm not going to let this experience be the only thing that motivates me.
I do want to make one point before you bring up the next question. When we're talking about what comes next and that we can invent that, because it is, I think sometimes heaven is what we create. Hell is going to be what we fear most, right? The things that we've put on ourselves. I think hell, I believe now from the things I've heard and the concepts of it, I believe hell is going to be facing that moment of revelation of life, not necessarily where you get to see all the highlight reels. I think you're going to have to relive all the moments you were a shithead to somebody else and watching how it impacted and affected them. And I think you don't just get to watch it. I think you walk in their shoes and feel that pain and how your words cursed them and how your words hurt them or your physical activity hurt them. So I think the true hell for a guy like Hitler and a guy like Bundy and a guy like Gacy is that they get to live all of those lives, each one, before they'll ever get to clear. They've got to go through all the lives they've destroyed in the past. So start thinking about making your heaven on earth by being kind to everyone at every chance you get. And more importantly, be careful what you wish for. It's real easy for me to think, God, I've got 11 kids. When I get to heaven, it's going to be quiet and no kids. But you have to remember that with every wish, there comes a curse. My happiest place on earth is with my kids and grandchildren. I don't want to put that out to the universe that I'm going to be alone on the other side. I want them all there, cuddling, snuggling, watching cartoons, playing, and just that's what I'm going to create as my heaven. So I'm hoping that that's what's going to greet me.
To speak to that, those needy spirits we spoke to in the early portion of the hour are, that families weren't ready to connect with, weren't ready to give absolution to. That's something that spirit has to carry around until they're ready to say, okay, I'm ready to talk to you. And that spirit energy is very, I don't want to use the word oppressive, but very needy, I just need to make this connection and start this process. And if you're denied that, I think that is very difficult.
Yeah. And I've got a couple of great questions lining up. I know we're getting close to the end of our time together, so if you guys can bear with me. CJ Momo Marie says, I'd love to ask them, based on my experiences about seeing the other side, can spirits take you to the other side to visit them instead of them coming here?
I feel like this is something that comes through with dreams a lot for us, and I don't want to speak to everyone's experience. In the realm of the occult and witchcraft, in seance, even in magic, there is this element of, okay, so we can journey, we can go places in our mind. I think dreaming, that can come through very prominently. And I know, Kat, you have a place you kind of go to when we do mediumship and when we do seances.
Yeah.
That's like an in-between.
Yes. Wow. I don't think I've ever spoken about this before, but it is what I kind of cultivated a comfortable place where spirits can come that might look to some people like the other side. So it's almost like sort of an amusement park that is trying to be something else, thinking like Disney World.
I like that. Jeremy, I think we kind of just talked about that a few moments ago, but in the afterlife, do notions of things like civil rights get updated? Would someone that died in the 1950s treat people like they did in the 1950s versus how we treat people today? You guys are mediums. You probably know this better. If it's an earthbound spirit, they're probably living in the same mindset they had here. But once they've cleared that path, all of the people that they hurt with their slander and slurs and hatred, it's probably been revisited on them. That there's in the Twilight Zone movie, folks. Although Vic Morrow died and it was a tragedy what happened to him, his story is so poignant that I wish it would be shown again today. Just that segment in every school and classroom. He's this big mouth, bigoted jackass, and throwing the N-word around and every slang you could, and then he keeps popping in and out of time in different aspects. He's a black man on the run in one scene. He's a Hispanic person in another. He's a Jew in World War II. It's this, and he's reliving and seeing the atrocities placed on him. And that was hell. That was hell on earth. And I think that, and again, you guys can speak to this more on the spiritual side, but I think that is going to be a lot of the reflection we face when we pass over.
Yeah, there's a certain kind of cheat to saying like we're all one. And I think sometimes that's used to gloss over atrocities or harm, to just say, well, we're all one. Why can't we get along? But in the spirit world, when we connect with a spirit that seems to be connected to that universal consciousness, there's a deep knowing of there's a oneness, that I am somehow you, and that we are deeply entwined, and that we are deeply projecting and co-creating together. And I think that reality is something that I'm most looking forward to in the next life, is passing into that real connection between we are all one, and not in like a kind of flaky new age way, but in an experienced way.
Hey, I've got nothing against flaky new age people. I don't know why you keep picking on them. All right, Dan? You're going to have to live through the life of every flaky new age person you keep putting down.
I'm excited.
Guys, you are phenomenal. I love having you on. We got to visit more often. And it's just been so much fun to chat with you guys. If they want to get readings, if they want to learn more, what's the best thing for them to do?
Yeah, so we do group readings every month, and we do them digitally. You can find that on our website, theeckharts.com, and it's a Zoom gallery reading. So we try and connect with as many people as we can over the course of an hour and a half. Mm-hmm. And then if you want one-on-one time with us, we do offer one-on-one live through Zoom readings. You get a private link, you get to keep the video to rewatch, all of that good stuff. And then, of course, we do offer some personal events, the time and place permitting.
Yes, and you can find us on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook.
Yes, we are at the.eckharts on Instagram and TikTok. We are the eckharts.com on our website.
So if they go to your website, will they find all your social media tabs and how to find you? Great. Guys, you're welcome to hang in if you'd like. Otherwise, you're welcome to disconnect if you don't want to be here for this last little segment. But I think today we're going to work on something together for our listeners. And last week we talked about letting things go, things that don't serve us. And I hope that you keep doing that experiment. If you didn't listen, go back to last week's episode, last Friday's podcast, last Thursday's live show. Even if you don't want to watch the rest of it, watch the last segment, because this experiment, I've gotten such overwhelming email from people thanking me for doing that and sharing that I wanted to make sure that we come up with something a little different this week. And now that we've learned how to kind of let go of something that doesn't serve us, the things that are holding us back, I want you to do that every day. Let something go, give it back to the universe, start chiseling away at that mountain of crap that you carry on your shoulders. But now I want you to do something, and I want everybody to do this with me. So go ahead and close your eyes. And I want everybody to just take a deep breath in through the nose and out through the mouth, and in through the nose and out through the mouth. Throughout our life, the things that have made us who we are today are mostly things that were predicated on pain. And I want you right now to pick out one instant, just one instance, whether it was a week ago or a year ago or 30 years ago. I want you to remember a moment when you were broken. And I want you to think about that moment for a few minutes and how it felt, and how alone you felt, and how sad and isolated. And now I want you to imagine yourself right now embracing that version of yourself and giving them love, giving them affection and forgiveness to start the healing. And take in another deep breath in through the nose and out through the mouth. and in through the nose and out through the mouth. And I want you to just fill that moment, that void, with love, and revisit that moment whenever you want. And start visiting those moments in the past. Because you have to remember that it wasn't those moments of hitting the ground that defined who we are. It's how you stood back up and what you did next that defines who you are. Brushing yourself off and getting back in the life, getting back into the game. It sounds cliche and corny, but it's true. Now, the tough part is I want you to do one more thing before we end this. I want you to keep those eyes tight. I want you to take another deep cleansing breath. I want you to see yourself separating from that younger, hurt version of yourself. And now I want you to bring yourself to a moment when you were cruel to somebody. Maybe you were a child and said, "Grandma, why are you always so fat?" Or just something that everybody does, and something that you wish that as an adult or any age that you're at right now, you could take back. And I want you to go to that person mentally. I want you to see that person at that age. And I want you to give them love right now. I want you to focus the love on that person and give them love and give them permission to forgive you and ask for forgiveness. You might not hear an answer back, but by opening that conduit, we've made connections to all of these people through our life. We're so intertwined with one another. This is our chance to give love back. And maybe the healing will begin, because I do believe that within ourselves, we contain the ability to time travel to the moments in our life that hurt us the most and that we impacted somebody else's life. And you never know, if we keep visiting those spots, if we keep whittling down that pain, maybe the butterfly effect in your life will begin to change. And maybe we'll start changing the rings in the pond and your life will start to feel better. You'll loosen and give away those things that have hurt you and that you've been carrying with you for so long. Last week, we talked about focusing and releasing, taking something that's just pure shit and horror and releasing it back to the universe's light and giving it back. Now you're going to do this to yourself. You're going to give back your love and peace to yourself, and you're going to give love and peace to those that you've hurt. Now take another deep cleansing breath in through the nose and out through the mouth. And I want you to picture that person fading and your whole being surrounded in white light. And I want you to just imagine everybody you've ever come into contact with feeling that white light and that love. And that should be the feeling you leave with everybody every day. So work on that for me. When you're laying in bed and you can't go to sleep and those voices are pecking away at your brain, go back and visit those moments when you hurt the most and when you hurt people, and try to fix them. Try to make amends now in life so that your soul can have peace in the afterlife. And that when it's time to say goodbye to somebody in this lifetime, you've done everything you can to make sure that you don't need a medium. You don't need somebody else to connect you, because you will have had the ultimate communication and love exchange while they're here on earth. I want all of you to have a safe, happy weekend filled with lots of love and fun. Laugh as much as you can, enjoy your time, and be kind to yourself. That's where it all starts. Kat and Dan, thank you so much. The Eckharts, it's been great to have you here tonight.
Thank you for having us.
This is awesome.
Thank you. And thank you all for tuning into the best in paranormal podcasting. We'll be back again next week with another live video stream. And we'll be back next week with more of the best in true crime and paranormal talk radio. I'm Dave Schrader. Back at home base is Tim Dennis. And this is Darkness Radio.